Here we are at the San Francisco International Book Fair. It's February 16th, 2013. And our first victims are David Margolis and his charming wife, Jean Moss. And I'm going to do what I always do, is try to find out something biographical about the two of you. Home life, what your parents did, do you have siblings, what schools you went to, how you met, and stuff like that. So give me a biopic, if you will. Jean?
I'm an Army brat. I went to 13 schools before I graduated from high school and 2 universities. My father was an Army chaplain, colonel when he retired. I moved to Germany in 1946 with the occupation, and lived in Turkey when I was growing up and all over the country, and with my 4 siblings. And when I went to university, I was a literature and theater major. Always had an interest in books. There were always a lot of books in my family's house. Not real books.
No.
Not
Your
even,
parents avid readers?
But my father was a really avid reader. My mother didn't have time. She would have liked to have been, but
What was your father's
with the
name?
5 kids. He was a colonel. When he retired. Colonel, of course, he went
Yeah.
went through the ranks to get to there. And he was a chaplain.
So what period of time does this cover?
My father went in the Army during the war. I was born in 1940, barely in 1940, the very end. And my father went in the Army during the war and then stayed in. So we moved to, as I said, we moved to Germany in 1946. We're there with the occupation. We were all over the United States. I was a teenager in Turkey, and went to 3 high schools. Graduated from Topeka High, and went 2 years to Trinity University in San Antonio, and 2 years graduated from William & Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia.
And you graduated as a literature and theater
Literature
major?
and theater major, yeah.
Okay, when did you graduate?
1964.
1964.
I dropped out for a year in between,
Okay,
in
then
between the 2 things.
1964, what happened after 1964?
I moved to New York City, where I was working in fashion. And in retail, I was like an assistant buyer at Bonwitz. And then I was running a couple of boutiques in the village. Then I moved to England for a year, where I was working also in a retail store there. And then I moved to France for about half a year or whatever, and then came back to the United States. Was going to go back to France, was going to spend the rest of my life in France, and met my first husband and didn't go. Became a ski bum.
How long were you married to your first husband?
4 years. We were together for 6 years. We were kind of hippie ski bums,
Yeah.
doing things. Moved to Taos to ski, and ended up in Santa Fe. He was an architect and he got work there, and I was continuing to do things, but also always wanting to be an actress, because that had always been my original thing. That was the passion. So, yeah. Then when I divorced him and I met David, we moved back to New York City because I was pounding the pavements, trying to be an actress, doing some off-Broadway work, that kind of thing. And David got his job at Swann.
Really?
And that's where
And so
that's how we got.
Okay, let me stop you there, and let's take David with the same question. David, you're a small biopic. Take us up to when you met Jean.
I was born in Brooklyn, 1944. In, I believe, 1951, my family moved to Long Island, Rockville Center, where I went to high school. My father worked for department stores in Manhattan, first for Best & Company, then for Gimbel's. Actually, when I graduated from high school in 63 or 2, my folks moved back into New York because the kids were out. And then I went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn as graphic designer, where that was my specialty. from 63 to 67. And then I went to graduate school, University of Pennsylvania, once again in fine arts. Graduated in 1970 with a master's degree, Master's of Fine Arts. By that time, I was with a woman who eventually became my first wife, and we moved out to the West. We wanted to get away from our parents. We were basically hippies. We just wanted to drop out of the commercial world. I was a graphic designer, and I either got very serious and went to Dusseldorf and did serious work, or I got a job on Madison Avenue with publishing or advertising, or I dropped out, and I opted to drop out. And we were pretty poor and went to various locations, Oregon, San Francisco, and eventually went to New Mexico and found that it was a very proud place to be poor. I wouldn't be in a ghetto. I ended up in a little village called El Rito, which is 60 miles north of Santa Fe, rented an adobe house on 2.5 acres for $25 a month, and lived for 2 years. And
with the woman that
with Vicky, my first wife. And we were very different people, and living 24/7 in a rural situation made us find out that it wasn't right for us. So we moved to Santa Fe to try to sort of save our marriage, and it didn't happen, so we got divorced. And that was probably in 1971 or 2, and in 73 I met Jeannie. And after a year, we decided to move back to New York, and Jean wanted to pursue her acting, and I wanted to get a job using my skills. It ends up that a friend of ours who has a loft in what's now Tribeca, spend their summers in Greece, and we could take their loft for the summer. So we went, and Jean she got a waitress job and started interviewing.
Okay, that takes us up to when you first met. But what I'd like to know, and probably the people watching this interview want to know, is when were you bitten by the book bug? I would assume, David, you were the one who was bitten by the book bug, and Jean decided to hang in with you.
In reality, when we were in New York, I tried to get a job. I had a portfolio. I went to publishers. I went to advertising agencies. My father actually was very supportive of me getting a job and found lots of people for me to interview. And having been out of grad school for 3 or 4 years, being on my own, I found out that everybody wanted some hotshot right from school, and they wanted you to be thrilled and excited with everything, and I wasn't. So I didn't get a job, but a friend of ours who we knew in Santa Fe, who moved to New York before us, ended up that he was pushing books at Swann Galleries, Clark Kimball. And Clark, when we moved to New York, was just finishing working with Terry Bellinger up in Columbia, and he got a job at the Morgan Library. So he was leaving Swann. He said, go speak to this guy, George Lowry. And I had always collected stuff. I collected photographs, I collected books. I used to go to Shotsky's place and buy little individual pages of incunables and stuff. So I went and saw Mr. Lowry at Swann Galleries, and was hired, and basically to start pushing books. And very quickly I started cataloging LECs. And
you were also, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
you were hired to start the photography department.
Well,
he knew that you knew something about photography and nobody else did at that point.
Yeah, and very quickly it ends up that I worked with Ed Halbmeyer, who was the guru at Swann, and they were finding that any object, any book that had photographs in it was going for crazy prices, and nobody understood why. Swann at that time was the repository for institutional deaccession.
Yeah, right.
The not merchant library, the
Mercantile.
Mercantile Library, they sent their whole library to us. I mean, on and on. And so all of these books that were photographically illustrated were going crazy. So George asked me to basically look into it, all the stuff came to my desk, and eventually I started the photography department. We put out some catalogs, they did well, and it kept going.
How long were you there?
I was there from 75 to 79, 5
Wow.
years.
Yeah.
What were you doing while he was doing that? Were
I
you
was
still
pounding
the
I was pounding pavements as an actress.
She was
But
earning
I
a
had
living.
always haunted old books, secondhand bookstores and collected ephemeral items and
If you
books,
tell
that
people
kind of
today
thing.
about Fourth Avenue, they look at you like you have three heads,
Right?
Yeah.
because it used to be the happy hunting ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mendoza's down below.
Yeah, Dobbin
Yeah.
Pine.
Yeah, Dublin, yeah. And I would just go to those places and just, I wasn't collecting systematically or knowledgeably, but I just always done that.
Well, actually, while we were at
And-
Swann,
and
you started
That's
collecting.
That's when I started my
Margaret-
that's when I started my Margaret Armstrong collection. Was the first person to hit Argosy. One day on my day off, I went from the top floor all the way
Went
down to
down
the
to
basement and
Argosy.
came, from 35 cents to $4. I bought Margaret Armstrong, the collection that I recently sold to Library of Congress. That's when I started that.
How long did it take him to pay you?
Not
Actually,
bad.
not bad at all.
And we're told that the curator who bought the collection was so much in love with it that it's now in her office.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
That's cool.
what Daddy Simone told us that.
Okay, let me ask you a couple of business-related questions now that we've got the personal stuff out of the way. What percentage of your business is done on the internet, and what percentage of your business is done at book fairs, and what percentage of your business is done through listings? I mean, can you give me some kind of an idea of where you stand vis-a-vis those various methods of selling?
Well, let me first say that traditionally, and for many years until recently, 1/3 of our business was to dealers, 1/3 to institutions, and 1/3 to collectors.
Right.
And 1/3 of our business was photography, 1/3 was ephemera, and 1/3 was books, more or less. And it was the same at every fair. That was the way we sold. It was sort of the same overall.
We've been in business
Yeah,
30
yeah.
some odd years. For the first 20, that's the way it worked. The last 10 years, certainly now, we probably do a little less than 10% from the internet. We probably spend 30% of our time mucking with the internet.
Yeah.
And presently, well, because of the computer and the internet, we had a general antiquarian shop in Santa Fe. About the same time that the internet took off, we closed our open shop and moved to a large book room adjacent to our home, and also started revamping our business from being generalists to specializing. And now we spend a lot of our energy buying and selling Mexico and Latin American material, though we'll buy any good book we can. And at the moment, I'd say 80% of our business is institution. We do one book fair a year, the California Book Fair, and we know very few private collectors.
So you're mostly an institutional
Yeah.
Yeah.
and dealer-to-dealer kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we actually sell very little to dealers except when we're here.
At the
Yeah.
book fair, because nobody comes to Santa Fe. And we-
Right.
That's
Yeah.
too bad. It used to be a heck of a place to go and visit.
Yeah, and it's not a
It
bad
still
book
is.
town, but anyway, it's in the middle of nowhere.
Well, my friend, may rest in peace, Fred White, used
Yeah.
to
Sure.
used to always say, "Welcome to the land of enchantment."
Yeah.
Whenever you would go there.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a hypothetical question. Well, not really hypothetical, but are there any booksellers other than Swann, living or dead, that were sort of a mentor or a strong influence on you?
Well, certainly, Gene and I got involved very early in Ephemera. And at the time we got involved, not that we saw much of him, but Rocky Gardner,
Yeah.
and Sam Murray, these were people who were taking seriously, and for them it was Americana,
Yeah.
18th century usually, but taking very seriously these bits and pieces of stuff.
Right.
I will admit our colleagues Rob and Diane from A Gathering
Yeah.
have always been very close with us, and we really
They-
share and
Yeah, we do business together. Where
They're very nice.
our closest friends. You know, they're some of our
Very
their
nice
closest
people.
friends, and they've been and they've been very influential.
And actually,
With,
Paul Hertzman and Susan Herzig, who are photo dealers, they're not an ABAA,
Yeah.
but we have, for the past 10 years now, been, as partners, putting out catalogs of photographically illustrated books. And I've learned a lot from them, and they've certainly learned a lot from us, but you know, it was more of a partnership than a mentorship.
I think
And-
you should tell your Warren Howell story, though, because that was something that actually led us into business. I mean, a little
Yeah,
thing
sure.
that led
When
us-
I
that
was-
led
Let's
us
hear this
into
anecdote.
that
When
led
I-
us into business.
When I was at Swann Galleries, I was working in a desk next to Halbmeyer, who was the major cataloger at Swann. And George Lowry, who owned Swann, ran it, would always allow me to pay attention to the auctions. I was actually very interested in who was buying and who was
Right.
selling, and things that I had cataloged, I'd like to see them go and so forth. And he liked having somebody to keep an eye on things.
Yeah.
Anyway, one day while I was cataloging, this very dapper, tall gentleman came by, and his gray hair and a pinstripe suit, and it was Warren Howell, who I had heard about, but I never met him because he's from the West Coast. And he introduced himself, and he says, "David, you have a group of photographs in a wooden box that says Yosemite, and you say they're worth $8,000 to $10,000. Why?" He says, "I've been selling things from California for decades, and I don't understand this." I don't know if he used those words, but so basically I explained who might have taken them, because it was either Weed or Muybridge or somebody else, Watkins, and explained about mammoth plates and how difficult they were to create, and these are very early, on and on. Okay, he thanked me, he left, and that next day at auction he spent $13,000 buying this. And I realized for the first time that I had knowledge that was above and beyond my $280 salary.
Oh, yeah.
And started thinking for the first time that I could become a bookseller.
Yeah.
And
So
and
that was a good lead-in for you.
And to bring that up to date, Warren bought that for Eldon Grupp, who's a collector of Yosemite, very serious collector. Last year, he put the same set up at Sotheby's and brought $380,000. So,
Photographica,
yeah.
visual.
Yeah.
That's what people are looking for. If you were entering the book trade today, would you? And if you would, how would you go about it?
Well, we were poor. And because of my exposure to Swann and 5 years of watching the auction gallery and Gene's endless reading and serious, and but serious knowledge of literature and so forth, we were able to use our knowledge to get into the game. It's a very hard game to get into now without some sort of capital, unless you really can figure some specialization or a little crazy nook that will allow you to find something inexpensive and make something of it and sell it for more.
A lot of booksellers seem to be thinking that's what they're doing.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you know, one of my sort of only real regret in terms of book selling is that I always loved artist books. I always loved them. I always would have liked to deal in them. But you don't just deal in one or two. It has to be a major specialization. I think you could still do other things, and somehow we never. Although of course everybody takes them on consignment, so in a way, it's not. It is easier because you don't have to have the cap. You don't have to put out the capital that you do, and I think that if I were younger and I wanted, I think maybe I would try and deal in artist books. I think it was something that I would understand, and that, you know, without a lot of capital, a lot of work, but with a lot of work, and because you have to build the context and all that.
You're not going to work at this business at a high level and a lot of hours and a lot of energy. You're going to wind up like some of our colleagues who have been in it for a year or two and then they disappear.
Yeah.
And you don't want that to happen. What do you guys perceive as the greatest challenges facing the antiquarian book trade in the years ahead?
Well, one of the things people constantly say is it's hard to find young people to enter the trade, as we've
Or to buy.
and also to buy. I mean, you're collecting. One of this, I wouldn't say it's the saddest, but one year we lost 3 institutional libraries or directors in the same year, and 1/3 of our income just dissolved because the person who took over the job was either not interested in what we were or had their own people they bought from. So
That's bad.
the reality is time changes, and I guess something we're learning, or hopefully learning, is that we have to keep changing the business. When we started the business, I thought we'd do the same thing the same way forever.
Forever.
Right.
Forever.
Yeah,
We
and that's
you know,
over.
we live in an isolated part of the country. Over the years, we've gotten a few very good collections right there, but you know, not that many. And for 20-some years, we drove back and forth across the country, stopping at every antique store, every bookstore, and buying. Of course, the internet changed that,
Absolutely.
and eBay, and of course, since we always bought a lot of ephemera, which neither booksellers nor antique shops knew what to do with.
Right.
We could do very well. I think every bookseller who's been in business for a long time finds that they have to keep reinventing themselves.
Absolutely.
You know, and
Absolutely.
it's just you're just
What's interesting
so
about
totally different from what we did before.
reinventing, when we started, we could go to an antique shop that was owned by somebody and he was there, and there'd be a box of paper.
Yeah.
And we could talk to the owner and discuss how much and buy the box. Okay. Then antiques changed into malls,
Right.
antique malls, which meant that every piece of paper had to be labeled by who owned
Right.
it so that the person who did not own it could sell it.
Try to say.
Right.
So all of a sudden, boxes of paper were gone. It was individual pieces.
Yeah.
Then eBay came along, and all of a sudden, what might have been interesting is no longer there, because anything somebody didn't know about or was curious, they just take a picture and throw it up on eBay. So the ability to find material just got much harder, as I see, because of those factors.
Okay, I have one more question before I let you go. And if a young bookseller, male or female, came to you and said, I'd like to get into the book business, what's the most important thing you think I need to have?
You know, once we would have said a reference library.
Yeah, forget about that.
Forget about it. Exactly.
about that.
Exactly. I mean, it's
You still need reference books, but you don't have to own them anymore.
That's right.
Exactly. And
I mean, in your field, for $175, you have American Exchange.
Yeah, which I don't use.
Yeah, but
Well-
everybody who's young does.
Yeah, that's
If the-
fine. I'm not young.
yeah, right, exactly. And
Yeah.
we still use our reference library.
So do I.
And in fact, of course, that was also considered, I think, for many of us, it was also kind of our IRA.
Well,
Not,
yeah.
not that we would ever retire, but it was worth something.
Now it
And
isn't.
it's not even worth it. It's just not worth anything anymore.
I'd
For a
say
young person,
you need passion for the stuff.
Yeah.
yeah.
And you certainly need some sort of capital.
And then you need a focus, because there's no such thing as really a general
Absolutely.
antiquarian
Not-
bookseller anymore.
not
It
in
just
this day
I mean
and
it
age.
just yeah.
The best answer I've ever gotten to that question is from Doug Harding, who said, "Own your own building."
Right. But
Well,
that's
you
somebody
know.
somebody who comes
Yeah.
from the 50s and 60s,
Yeah,
right?
Own your own
right,
building.
right,
It's just, you know,
right.
when you think
The
about
Luke,
it,
the Luke
wow.
Cohn- right. Well,
Yeah,
Luke
that was-
Cohn was
Yeah.
you know, he's one of the last book-selling families in New York because he owned that building from the 30s. So.
And I know that Judy has told us when they bought that when his parents, her father bought that building, it was like people said, "Are you crazy?
Up on
Are you
59th
crazy?
Street?
Are you crazy to buy a
You
building?"
know how far you are from 4th Avenue?
It was before the Depression, I think,
Yeah.
that he bought the building, or during the Depression, maybe.
I always liked him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
He was a sweet guy, really a nice person.